Jeffrey Epstein's longtime attorney, Darren Indyke, testifying today on Capitol Hill behind closed doors. The House Oversight Committee continues its inquiry into the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files. Wednesday night, fireworks at the committee briefing, the Democrats walking out after Attorney General Pam Bondi refused to commit to testify under oath despite being subpoenaed. Scripps News senior national correspondent Alex Miller is live in New York now with the latest on this. And Alex, what exactly happened in the briefing, and will the AG be back on Capitol Hill next month?
Del, that is exactly the question many lawmakers are asking. The Attorney General is supposed to testify April 14th behind closed doors, sit for a deposition under oath, something that she would not commit to during Wednesday evening's briefing, part of what prompting Democrats to walk out of that hearing. We heard.
All right, Adam is here, guys. Something just happened in Washington that the political insiders swore could never happen. Not like this, not at this scale. Not with this kind of bipartisan fury tearing through both sides of the aisle simultaneously, but it happened. And the people who have spent decades inside the Beltway are standing there slack-jawed, watching the political earthquake they told everyone was impossible.
Some fired-up members of the Democratic on the House Oversight Committee are speaking now after listening to Attorney General Bondi talking about the Epstein files. Let's listen in.
To our lawful subpoena in a deposition. So instead I asked Chairman Comer if he would compel her to come to our deposition. If she did not come, would he force her to, or if he would move for contempt hearings as he did for other people who did not respond to our subpoena. Instead of answering as an adult, he said that I was bitching, which is again, something that would not be allowed if we were operating under the rules of this committee, because engaging in personalities is actually something that we are not able to do. If C-SPAN and the public were there, I'd imagine that he would not act that way. Neither here nor there, we expected AG Bondi to be adversarial. We expected her to be confrontational. And we expected her to not offer us much information. But that's why I introduced impeachment articles, because she has already been obstructing justice. She has already weaponized the DOJ.
For years, the narrative has been that Congress is broken beyond repair, that Democrats and Republicans cannot agree on the color of the sky, let alone hold a president accountable. That partisan tribalism has killed any chance of institutional integrity. But here we are, right now, watching something unfold that the modern political era has never produced. Republican and Democratic lawmakers standing shoulder to shoulder.
This fake hearing, we found out about it yesterday, with no time to prepare, with no format given to us. We had no idea what the even format was going to be until just an hour or two before the actual, this kind of fake hearing that was set up. And it was clear from the minute it started that the Attorney General is trying to evade and not attend the mandated subpoena that is put in place. We asked her that question. Multiple members asked her the question. She would not respond. She said she'll continue to follow the law. That is not a response. She has a subpoena in place by Chairman Comer.
Cameras rolling, microphones live, no coded language, no carefully crafted deniability, just raw, unfiltered demands in open congressional proceedings. Resign now or face impeachment. Those words are coming from Republicans, on the record, with their Democratic colleagues standing beside them in a coalition that grows larger with every passing day.
Remember, our desire to get the Attorney General and Todd Blanche under oath is because we've been faced with lies from the very beginning. Go back to February 21st, 2025. Pam Bondi told us and told the public that the files, the Epstein file client list was on her desk. But then we found out that was a lie. Then she told us that that on July 25th, 2025, she said there's no need for any more disclosure on any of these Epstein files. Then we found out later there's 6 million documents. They give us 3 million of those.
This is not about political theater. This is not about fundraising emails or cable news soundbites. This is about something far more serious. The Epstein obstruction crisis has become the pressure point that finally cracked the partisan dam wide open. And the crack is spreading faster than anyone anticipated. Let me tell you exactly what is happening inside the Capitol right now, because the surface coverage is missing the real story. Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky, a Republican who has spent his entire congressional career as a constitutional purist, stood in front of cameras in an official proceeding and said something extraordinary. He did not hint. He did not hedge. He looked straight into the lens and said the president personally directed Bondi and Patel to bury the Epstein files. Direct instruction, direct involvement, direct obstruction ordered from the top. And here is what makes that moment different from everything we have seen before. Massie was not alone. Democratic colleagues flanked him. Republican colleagues flanked him. A bipartisan coalition standing on the same ground, saying the same thing, demanding the same accountability. The political establishment is scrambling to process what this means, but the math is already working itself out in real time. The number of lawmakers calling for resignation or removal has been climbing steadily. Republican members who have spent months holding the line on party loyalty are now doing the political calculations in their own districts, and those calculations are producing a result that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. The cost of standing with this cover-up has exceeded the cost of demanding accountability. What changed? The legal landscape shifted underneath everyone. The 9-0 Supreme Court ruling on immunity stripped away the argument that Republican members had been using to defend the administration's conduct. When the highest court in the land unanimously says the legal defense you have been relying on is invalid, you cannot keep using it. And when the Epstein files started forcing their way into the open through court-ordered disclosures, the documented record became impossible to ignore. Federal courts have been calling out the obstruction pattern in writing for months, contempt findings against Bondi and Patel, a 130-page ruling demolishing the New Jersey prosecutor scheme, active court orders forcing disclosure of materials the administration has been fighting to suppress. These are not political attacks. These are judicial findings, legal records, documented facts. And the Republican members joining this bipartisan coalition are responding to those legal records the same way any constitutionally serious member of Congress should respond when the documented record shows what this one shows. Now let me tell you about what happened when the resignation demands hit the White House. 32 posts in a single day on Truth Social. 32, not a typo. The President of the United States posted 32 times in 24 hours threatening civil war if Congress moves forward with impeachment. Impeach me and see civil war. That exact language, posted repeatedly, escalating with each new post. Let that sink in for a moment. A sitting American president is publicly threatening armed internal conflict as a deterrent against the constitutional accountability process. The previous record for this kind of meltdown was 27 posts after the Supreme Court immunity ruling. Now it is 32. The volume is increasing. The language is getting more extreme. The trajectory is telling you everything about the psychological state inside the White House right now. This is not a communication strategy. This is not carefully calibrated messaging. This is the documented public response of someone whose awareness of their own legal and political exposure has overwhelmed every normal response mechanism. And the entire country is watching it happen in real time. The polling underneath all of this has shifted in ways that should be generating emergency-level concern inside the administration. 52% of Americans now support impeachment. That is a majority. More than half the country saying the constitutional removal process should be initiated right now. But here is the number that tells you everything about where this is heading. 38% of Republicans support impeachment, not opposed, not undecided, supporting it. More than a third of the Republican base has moved to a position of active support for impeaching their own party's president. That number does not exist in any previous modern presidency. It reflects a structural fracture that is going to define the political landscape for years. Think about what produced these numbers. The 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, the forced Epstein file disclosures, the documented obstruction pattern that federal courts have been calling out in writing, the bipartisan resignation demands, the 32 Civil War posts, 12 Republican contempt crossovers in the House, 28% overall approval, 45% Republican base opposition, all of it converging simultaneously. And here is what the surface coverage is missing. This is not political performance. This is not opposition theater designed for midterm fundraising. This is the documented, on-the-record institutional response of members of Congress across both parties to a specific and compounding pattern of executive conduct that the federal courts have repeatedly and explicitly characterized in writing as deliberate obstruction. The March 20th contempt deadline is running. Bondi and Patel are facing potential jail consequences if they continue to withhold what the courts have ordered disclosed. The Epstein files are forcing their way into the open through the court order disclosure process, and every new disclosure is producing more material that more members of Congress have to publicly respond to. The question at the center of all of this is the question everything is building toward answering. What is in those sealed files? What is worth all of this? What is worth 32 Civil War posts and federal jail threats against the Attorney General and a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling being called a deep state coup and a bipartisan resignation coalition forming in real time in official congressional hearings? Massey's specific framing carries weight far beyond the political dimension. When he says Trump personally directed Bondi and Patel to bury these files, he is not just demanding accountability for the outcome. He is asserting direct presidential direction of the obstruction pattern. He is placing the decision to withhold these files not on subordinates acting independently, but on the president himself giving those instructions. That assertion, if it holds up in the proceedings that are now accelerating toward the contempt deadline and beyond, has consequences that extend well beyond political accountability into criminal accountability territory, and it is being made by a Republican member of Congress in an official hearing on the record. The contempt proceedings and the post-immunity disclosure process are now producing the documentary and testimonial record that will either support or fail to support that assertion. Investigators operating without the immunity wall blocking their access to pre-presidential records are specifically looking for the chain of command in the obstruction decision. Did it come from the president directly? What instructions were given and by whom and when? Those questions are now being pursued with full legal authority, and the contempt deadline is when the first round of answers becomes legally required. Now let me tell you about the Civil War language, because this specific response is categorically more dangerous than anything we have seen before. Impeach me and watch riots was already extraordinarily serious. But riots is at least somewhat ambiguous between prediction and incitement in a legal analysis context. Civil war is not ambiguous. Civil war is a specific historically loaded term that describes organized armed conflict between factions of a country. When a sitting president posts 32 times in a single day that impeaching him will see civil war, he is not predicting social unrest as a neutral analytical observation. He is invoking the specter of armed internal conflict as a deterrent against the constitutional accountability process. That language is going to be examined by every investigator and every legal scholar and every congressional member building the record for impeachment articles and obstruction prosecution. And it is going to be heard by the 38% of Republicans who already support impeachment as additional confirmation that the president is willing to threaten the physical safety of the country to avoid constitutional accountability. The trajectory of Republican crossovers on Epstein-related votes has been moving in one direction since this crisis began. 5 Republican members on the file release vote, 12 on the Bondi contempt citation, now the resignation coalition. Each escalation has brought more Republican members to the position of public opposition. And the 9-0 Supreme Court ruling was the escalation that made the largest single shift because it removed the legal argument that had been the most effective tool for convincing Republican members that the administration's obstruction was legally defensible. Without that argument, the only remaining defense is partisan loyalty. And partisan loyalty is not sufficient to hold Republican members who built their careers on constitutional principle when the documented record shows what this one shows. The coalition is going to keep growing as the contempt deadline approaches and as the disclosure process produces more material that more members have to publicly respond to. Every Republican member of Congress in a competitive district is doing their own math about which side of this historic moment they want to be documented as standing on. So here is exactly where we land right now. A bipartisan resignation coalition demanding immediate resignation or impeachment proceedings in official congressional hearings. Massey asserting direct presidential direction of the Bondi and Patel cover-up on the record. 32 Truth Social posts threatening civil war. 52% public impeachment support, including 38% of Republicans. 28% overall approval. 45% Republican base opposition. The 9-0 Supreme Court immunity ruling on the books. The contempt deadline running against Bondi and Patel with jail as the consequence. Active court-ordered disclosure of Epstein files producing the evidentiary foundation of the obstruction case. The MAGA coalition fracturing at the values level. A 5-seat House margin standing between this president and a House majority that can initiate impeachment proceedings. Whatever comes out of the contempt deadline is going to land in a political environment where a majority of Americans and 38% of Republicans are already saying the answer to the accountability question is impeachment. Watch this space extremely closely between now and the contempt deadline and beyond. The next chapter of this story is being written in real time across congressional hearing rooms and federal courtrooms, and the Truth Social posts of a president who is now at 32 Civil War posts and climbing. The bipartisan resignation coalition is growing. The court-ordered disclosure process is accelerating. The contempt deadline is running. The 52% public impeachment support is on the record. And every Republican member of Congress in a competitive district is doing their own math about which side of this historic moment they want to be documented as standing on. The next chapter is going to define the political and legal landscape of this country for years to come.